On today's Coach and Coordinator podcast, we dip back into our Game Plan for Your Next Job series. It's a series we've been running here for the last 2 off seasons, and we wanted to continue to provide you great information on how you get your next coaching job, whether that be as a head coach, a coordinator, or even a position coach. And joining us to discuss this is an expert on the topic, Coach Chris Fore. Chris, always great to have you here on the podcast.
Hey, good morning, Keith. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I call you Coach Chris Fore, but you've actually made a bit of a career change here. You're now a principal, which I think, we look at you as an insider into this because you've been an athletic director, you've been on the coach's side of the table, but we've talked about this before. The principal is always a stakeholder in this too, so even more insight into what goes into this process.
Yeah, it's been heading into my third year here as an administrator, first year as a principal, and definitely even moving from that athletic director seat over to an assistant principal, and then now a principal. Definitely, a little different. Looking at guys through a little bit of a different lens, not just the athletic lens, but how is this guy or gal going to help our entire campus now? So. Yeah, it's definitely looking at guys and gals in interviews a little different through a principal lens.
And I think you would agree, Chris, just with the events over the last year, I think everybody has become hypercritical about who is the person that we're hiring, who's leading our program, what are they going to say, how are they going to purport themselves as the leader of this program, because it reflects on everybody involved. And I think not that wasn't ever a focus before, but I think now it's more of a challenge in making sure that you find the right person. And it's also for those coaches, being on point and understanding that you always have to do the right things, that you're always under the microscope, maybe now more than ever.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Keith. The kind of whole cancel culture aspect right now that we're living in nationwide definitely puts a little more pressure on administrators to make sure, I've always, since I became an athletic director in 2010, I've always dug into the past of guys and really tried to talk to a lot of people as I do my background work on guys. But I think even now there's more pressure on coaches, on athletic directors, even head coaches as they hire assistants, to make sure you're getting a solid person in that vacancy because of what you've just said. There's all eyes on deck these days. You really can't hide from anything, that might be in your past, et cetera. And so that is very important. And I like the way you put that.
So in looking at that, Chris, you and I talked a little bit a few weeks ago about just the changes in this process. We, in various places in the country have been in shutdowns, various modes of shutdown. It looks like it's going to continue, maybe even get locked down a little bit more here as we get into the winter, which are the hiring months typically for football programs and athletic directors. And while it seems like maybe because there's places where things haven't moved and budgets are tight, maybe there's not going to be changes because there's, anytime you make a change, there's certainly an investment in time and resources in that. But there's going to be jobs open, and it's a different playing field than it was 12 months ago. There's a lot more you need to think about. And, what's interesting is where before you were going and sitting down in person with people and being able to read a room and connect with people because you're in the physical space, a lot of this is being done even into the late rounds and final rounds virtually.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the world has changed so much in the world of interviewing. I think in the last, since March. I'll never forget the first interview I did on Zoom of a candidate. It was a teaching candidate that we did maybe the middle towards the end of April, and our HR at my school district HR was like, yeah, we're going to do this virtually, on Zoom platform. And so long ago, Keith, they called it the platform, Zoom platform. Now we've just labeled that down Zoom. But I was like, oh man, this is funky. And then we're going to bring them in right after that, like narrow the candidates down. No, nobody can come on into campus or into the district right now, so it'll all be virtual. And I thought, as soon as I heard our director of HR say that, I thought to myself, boy, the entire game has just changed. That's a drop of a hat. Now, I think everything goes in cycles, these really big cycles that we see, and the pendulum swings. And right now, Keith, I think it's never been easier to interview for a job. This job I'm sitting in now as a principal, I started on July 1st here this year, 2020. My first 2 interviews were at home. I was wearing shorts down below and flip-flops and a tie and a coat, up top. So it's never been easier to interview for a job than it is today. I don't know that many places are bringing people in to interview around the nation, because now with Zoom and some online platforms, it's just so easy for everybody. When I interviewed for this principal job, I think there was 8 people on the panel the first interview, and they were all sitting in the comfort of their own home. A couple of them were on site here at my school in their offices, but that's definitely one thing that's been a big change here since all these shutdowns, is that interviewing now online. It's I don't think it's ever been easier to interview. With that, obviously, there comes some challenges as well. But I think that the way people are interviewing now, the way districts and universities are doing that, I think it'll be like this for a little while. Again, it's very easy to do. I interviewed a candidate here about a month ago, Keith, for a English language arts teaching job. She was sitting in an airport, because she really wanted this job. We were having interviews for like a 4-hour window. And she was traveling to see her mother, who's out of state in the Midwest. And so, boy, you talk about an opportunity she had, that would have never worked out before, but we were interviewing all of our candidates that way. And so I think that the interviewing game has changed for a little while, but I think eventually the pendulum will come back where companies and school districts and universities will say, you know what, we're really not getting a real good beat on these people online. Let's bring them back into the office, and that might be a few years, but it's definitely a very interesting situation right now.
Well, I think in some regards, and we might end up seeing that hybrid form of it. I can think early rounds and just, being on college coaching staffs and interviewing candidates, whether that was in the athletic department, which they would usually bring in the full-time assistants for, or for our particular team, is that, you did want to, in the college level, it's going to be from around the country. And we used to do those on a phone. We'd all sit in a room on a phone. And I think, it's better being able to actually see somebody on Zoom. But the opportunity opens up for people to explore maybe some of those moves to a different state. And, I'm thinking even just high school level, to a different state, a new community. I can remember, and I'm sure you can too, back in the early days of being a head coach and wanting to climb that ladder and find the right program, that, I'd drive 2, 3, 4 hours to a job that I wasn't quite sure about, but I'm going to go. I want the opportunity. So I got to spend a full day. Whereas with this, I'm going to flip on Zoom and spend 45 minutes to an hour and learn what I need to as well. Because you and I talked about that last time. This interview process is a two-way deal. It's not just, one side learning about who their candidate is. It's you learning about that program, that school, that community as well. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity, especially for the early rounds, to figure out, is this the right opportunity for me?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, very well put. It doesn't give us that opportunity to, get our feet into that campus or business as much, but I think it's still a chance to, get to know those folks running that school or that university, that business, to get our feet wet.
So for the unforeseeable future, though, this is the playing field we're working on. with Zoom. And, you mentioned there are some challenges to this, both for you on your side as the interviewer, but especially, on this other side, which we want to address, the interviewee, and how to be able to do some of the things that, were more easily done being face-to-face. Like I said before, even just little things like reading the room. When as you're looking around the table and you're talking about a certain thing and, one of those key stakeholders perks up a little bit because that's their area of interest, what you can do to maybe focus on that a little bit more and talk to that particular person. Yep. To let them know what they need to know about you in whatever that might be interested in. So I guess for you in looking at this, what are some of the key things our listeners, our coaches need to learn as they're going into these situations, these Zoom or whatever it might be, any kind of video platform where they're interviewing on?
Yeah, Keith, good question. I wrote out last night. I kind of wrote down some keys. I think keys to interviewing on Zoom. The first one I wrote down here was still dress the part. I think there's a tendency, you feel comfortable, you're sitting in your own house, your own bedroom, living room, what have it. And I've seen this again. I've interviewed, I think, about 50 to 60 people on Zoom or Google Meet here in the last since April. We've hired a bunch of teachers here at my new school, even some coaches we've had to hire and interview online. And so I think the first one is still dressing that part. I've seen through interviewing some of these guys and gals online, I've seen some people that would never walk into the interview room, wearing a T-shirt or a simple polo. And so I still think it's important, we talk in the interview world about you want to stand out. I still think it's important to do your best there and still dress the part. That's the first thing I wrote. And kind of along with that dressing the part is you want to make sure what's behind you in that interview room. And some people don't think about this, but you want to make sure that, what's behind you is clean and orderly. We interviewed a teacher who, you look behind in the office the person was sitting in, and I said, holy smokes, this room is so unorganized and so cluttered. Is this what their classroom is going to be like? And is this an indication of, their organizational skills? So I'd say that's the first key. You want to dress the part still, and then make sure you've got, a good, clean, organized, professional background as best you can.
Yeah, I think two very important points. And I was going to ask you about it, but you broke it up, that setting behind you, right, being in the right place. And I would say, if you don't feel comfortable about the look, and test it out before. Turn your Zoom on, look around you. What is that communicating about you? You can use a virtual background too, which can help. And the other part too is absolutely correct. At least up top, like you pointed out before, you got to be business up top, even if you're at the beach below.
Yeah, absolutely. No, on the virtual background, one of the things I did for this principal job I have, I went on their website. I got this beautiful picture of one of their insides of their building, and I put that up as a virtual background in my second interview. And the panel they loved that concept. That I was putting myself right on their campus. A few of those folks mentioned to me later how impressive that was, and it took me 30 seconds.
Yeah.
But for those people, it showed that, hey, I took a few extra steps to put myself in their shoes already.
Yeah, that imagery can be very powerful, right? Putting yourself in it. We do it all the time when we're putting together the portfolio for a program, making sure the cover is going to include some branding for that particular school, whether that's their logo or their helmet, always something that you do in those situations. And so why not, in this case, put that brand behind you. Let them envision you as part of the brand. And, it's going to get into the psyche of the interviewer. They're going to associate you with that, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So, Coach, what's the next tip you have for us?
Yeah, I'd say the next thing on interviewing, via Zoom or online here is be ready to go. Be early, be ready to go. these interview panelists, they're sitting in their office for maybe 2 or 3 hours at one time, and they've got a bunch of interviews lined up, just like they always have, but they've been in a central place. But I'll tell you, there's nothing more frustrating as an administrator when your candidate's not ready to go. And to me, Keith, that speaks volumes. Does this person not want a job? And it's amazing. I would say 30% or so, roughly 30% of the candidates that we've interviewed online since April, they haven't been ready to go when we start the interview. We're sitting there waiting for them. And I think, again, that says a lot about a candidate. You got to be punctual. And now the flip side is when I'm sitting here, we've wrapped up an interview. The interview team is sitting here talking about that candidate, maybe looking at the resume of the next person coming in. When they're 5 minutes early, I'm the one running the Zoom meeting, and I go, oh, hey, the candidate's here. They're in the interview room. They're in the waiting room. The flip side tells me, all right, that's somebody chomping at the bit. That's somebody organized, ready to go, who wants this job. So I think the second most important thing there is be ready to go and be early up to that interview, just like you would in person. You're not going to walk in late to an interview in the real world. Don't do it online.
Yeah, great point, Coach. What do you have for us next?
The next one would be have your tech dialed in. You've got one shot at this thing. You've got one shot at this interview. So make sure you're in a spot. If you're out traveling, like this lady I referred to in the airport, make sure ahead of time you've got a great Wi-Fi connection. About 3 years ago, I was interviewing for an assistant principal job in a district I really, really wanted to be in. I was speaking at the California Athletic Directors Association conference up in Northern California, and so I wasn't able to make the interview. But they set it up to interview me on Skype back then, just right on my cell phone on Skype. And it was the worst 20-minute interview I've ever been in my life, and I think they cut it short because my connection was awful, Keith.
Yeah.
And my Wi-Fi kept going kind of in and out, and it was horrendous. And so obviously I didn't move forward in that opportunity, but that was one opportunity I had at a really good district that I blew. It was kind of out of my hands, to be honest with you. I had no Wi-Fi connection at that hotel I was sitting in, but looking back, maybe I could have, I don't know, I could have found some way to find better Wi-Fi. So that's my third point. Have your tech dialed in. Make sure you get that all ready to go, because you might be a great candidate. You might be the best one in the pool, but if you've got a bad connection, and again, that's something I've seen since April, if it's frustrating for the panel, they got another person to interview. They're not going to give you a lot of grace.
Yeah, it could be very frustrating. I think it's something you got to be testing that out. And I would add, along with that, as much as possible I know you had that lady you mentioned in the airport, but to put yourself in an environment that is not going to have distractions, whether that's, the dog barking, yes, or the kids playing, or, every now and then I gotta delay a podcast recording because there's a landscaper outside the window or something with, cutting things up. Yep. So just things like sometimes out of your control, you don't know they're going to happen, but as much as possible, try to control that environment.
Yeah, that's a great point. Absolutely. The next one I have, Keith, number 4, you got to think of some ways for your personality to really come through. You got to smile. You got to smile more than you would, I think, in person. You got to try to laugh. You got to try to be a little loose in that interview. And I think that's a little different than that in-person interview, because I think you just have to look for more ways to allow your personality to come through. I interviewed myself. I was a candidate back this summer. I was interviewing for an assistant principal job at a school, and I had just walked into my office from something I was doing on campus where I had a mask on. And so I said, I'm gonna make these, and it was my second interview with this school. And so I said, you know what, I'm gonna try to lighten them up a little bit. I'm just gonna wear this mask as I'm interviewing, and I wasn't gonna wear it the whole time, but obviously it's kind of silly to sit here wearing a mask when you're in an office all by yourself. But what that did, Keith, was when I came on the screen and there was a panel of 6 or 7 people, for whatever reason, they thought that was kind of funny. I was sitting there wearing that, and I said, "Oh, can I take this off?" And then they're like, "Yeah, you're good," So it was just a way though for me to show a little bit of personality, getting that committee to smile a little bit, getting that committee to laugh a little bit. So I think you need to look for ways to let your personality show through in these Zoom interviews.
Absolutely. If you're somebody, and most coaches are able to feed off of other people's energy. It's different when it's done via Zoom. You kind of have to think of even amping yourself up a little bit more than you normally would be. Not forgetting, I'm somebody who likes to, as I'm sitting here, even with you on a podcast, using my hands to make points, and so do those things. Pretend you're in the exact same room.
Yeah.
Don't just sit there as a talking head. Still try to put that emotion and body language into things.
No, absolutely. And the next point kind of goes right into that, is that you've got to keep their attention span even more than an in-person interview. And so be quicker than you usually would. I think that, that's one thing I've seen, just feedback in my panels that I've had here for interviewing folks, is that it's a little harder. It's a little harder to sit at your desk interviewing these people, who are in another room or wherever they are. It's just a little harder mentally on the interview panel to stay plugged in and dialed into that person. You might have some, an email popping up or stuff happening on your computer that you're usually not distracted by. And so you really want to be able to keep the attention of that interview committee. And I think, like you just said, great point, that body language. I also talk with my hands. Do that in that interview, but keep your answers quicker, a little shorter than you usually would, just to keep their attention span and keep that interview moving. Don't sell yourself short where you don't think it's where you think it's important not to. I'm not saying to give too brief of answers, but you want to keep them a little quicker and tighter than you would when you're in the room.
Yeah, that's a great point, because on the other side of it, we know all of us having sat in Zoom meetings and in those conversations, there's certainly that opportunity, for the interviewer committee to get distracted as well, check their email, check their phone, see what's going on in the background with their kids as they're sitting at home, whatever it might be. Keep it on point. I agree with you 100%. Coach, what do you have for us next?
So yeah, the last key that I wrote down here, Keith, is you want to, and this is the same in person. When you go to that in-person interview, nothing tells me more about a candidate than when I receive an email before the interview or after the interview that says, "Hey, I'm coming in to interview with you this afternoon. I just wanted to, send my resume to you in case you don't have it, or remind you who I am." When I get that sort of email, and it's very, very rare, it's less than 10% of candidates ever reach out to me before the interview, but I think that's a really good key, a really good way for coaches to stand out to that committee is trying to figure out, if you're able to, and I talk about this a lot in the job search process, find out who's going to be on that interview panel. Reach out to them, the day of that interview. If it's in the afternoon, if it's in the morning, reach out to them the day before. Just again, send your cover letter, your resume, and a quick brief email. Just get your information before that committee again, or at least the principal if you're at a high school, the AD if you're at a college, university, and then follow up as well. And so, that's something I've always advised, but I think that now in this Zoom format that we're in, that little thing goes a long way, and I think it means even more now to send out that email before the interview and then send out an email to that panel afterwards, thanking them, for their time. I just think that, again, that helps you to stand out, and you'd be shocked at the very few percentage of people. I'd say even after an interview, it's 5 to 8% of people even reach out after an interview to say thank you for that time. But again, in this world where, I think companies, I know companies and schools, they're interviewing a few more people right now for their jobs because it is easier, okay, you got to do even a little more to stand out. And so back when I was coaching, Keith, I would email that panel afterwards, maybe the next day. I would email them my portfolio and, hey, here's a 3 things I want to do at your school. And so, again, I think that's important to follow up now more than ever.
Yeah, I think if you do your work beforehand, sometimes they let you know who's going to be sitting on that committee. I a little over a year ago was asked to interview for a Division III head coaching job here, and I wanted to go through the process. I didn't know what my interest was at that time to go back through it, but I could say I learned a lot about the process in going through, and I knew who was going to be on the committee. I did my research on them, and then afterwards, through that process, I was able to learn a little bit by the questions they asked. What were the things they were really interested in? And while that thank you, there was some general things, and certainly, like you said, maybe the top 3 things you want to do, but there were things tailored to each of those people on that committee who, if, as an example, the academics liaison, things that I could, again, reemphasize because it was a question came up or was a point I made to go back and think of not just a copy and paste to each of those people. I think you're better personalizing it because they compare notes, right? They know real quick that everybody got the same email.
Yep. No, absolutely. You want to be able to send that out to everyone on that panel if you can. And that's one of the good things about interviewing here online. I did that exact thing when I got this job as a principal. I wrote down the names of those people. On Zoom, a lot of times the name of everybody comes up, and so I wrote those names down, and they had no idea. They can't see my hand on my desk. They had no idea I was writing down the name of those 7 or 8 people in that interview. And so I think that's a really good idea. And that's actually a benefit. That's one of those benefits of interviewing now on Zoom is, when we're in the room, it kind of goes so quick, you're not able to really write down the name of that interview committee. But when you're online, that makes it a lot easier.
Absolutely. And on your side, you might not be able to record that Zoom, but you could do a screen recording to allow you to go back and a couple things. Number one, get all those names. What were the important points that were made? What were the things they were asking? What might you want to follow up on? But number two, this is all an evaluation process. So when you have that video of yourself and you can go back through and see, oh man, I can't believe I said this, or I need to have a better answer to this question, you're going to fine tune who you are as the interviewee as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's an awesome point. That's a great point you've made, Keith. I think it's very simple. And I did the same thing in interviewing for this job I have right now is I just recorded myself on my phone because, again, and I've done that in other in-person interviews over the years. You can kind of slip that phone in your pocket, recording as you go into the room. It's even easier now to do that, in the comfort of your home at your desk.
Absolutely. So a couple other things I mentioned. Myself having interviewed for that job, and my first interview was via phone, and I had everybody tuned in on the phone. So we didn't have Zoom at that time, which is crazy because you would, that is not that long ago. That was a year ago, and then Zoom came onto the as a platform and then shut down, but certainly has been around. One thing that they asked, and I think this is something that can be very valuable, is they wanted all candidates to put together a brief video explaining who you are and what you wanted to do. And, that 3 minutes seems like it could be a long time, but when you're really refining, this is at the heart, what I'm about and what I want to do for this program, that took me quite a long time to be able to do. And I mean, I ended up as, in the finals there, and for a job I wasn't sure if I was even interested in. But I think part of it was like I did a good job communicating up front exactly what I wanted to do, but that was not easy. We sit there and put together our portfolios, and those things can get pretty thick. And honestly, like, is everybody going to look at them? Probably not.
Yeah.
But when you have to do it in the video form, I think, number one, you want to get to to the top of the pile. If you communicate those things very well, they're going to see you're putting that extra effort into this particular job and doing something that most people are not right now. So I think that would be good to be able to put something together and send that along. And I think it helps you be concise, because I guess the other question I had for you, in interviews sometimes we'll pull out something from our portfolio and show everybody. And I think, you have the opportunity to share something on your screen, but I also could see where that could be a pitfall. Again, just to that idea of being concise, taking yourself off the screen, which I'm not sure you want to do. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I haven't seen. Well, I haven't given a candidate that opportunity, to share their screen, but I could see that being something, 2 or 3 rounds deep into an interview, if a district or a college university is hiring, maybe a head coach, and they're never going to bring him into the room. They're going to do it just solely on Zoom the whole time. That might be something that coaches definitely want to prepare for, to have something ready to go. I assume, you would know going into that interview that they're not going to surprise you. But I would say, make sure it is very organized. It is very dialed in before you take a chance by putting something up.
Yes. Well, Coach, I really appreciate you joining us and giving us those tips. I know you've done a lot here in putting together the resume writing guide, Insider's Guide to Resume Writing on CoachTube. I know this is something you do provide as a service, but because of your time, that it does cost a little bit more to get that personal attention. I think what's great about this is you've made this available to everybody. So just as we were talking about before, the convenience of being digital, I think you've done a great job with this. And, I was impressed as I was going through it. A friend of mine and been on the podcast a couple times as well, Ian Shoemaker, who is the offensive coordinator at Eastern Washington. He enlisted your services for the time where he was interviewing for the head coaching job at Central Washington, which he did get. And his testimonial here, I think, is just phenomenal. When the right job opened up for me, I looked for the best support person I could to find to make sure I would get an interview. Chris was able to help me organize my resume and supported me in producing an infographic that got my foot in the door. Thanks, Chris. Again, an incredible testimonial for somebody who our listeners know from this podcast as well. A great service. But talk to us a little bit about what you've put together digitally and made available really for everybody to look at and learn from at their convenience.
Yeah, I've been doing custom athletic resumes since about 2012, Keith. So the last 8 years. I've been basically helping coaches to get their foot in the door. A lot of coaches don't know how to write resumes. They write their resume using a business format, and they get frustrated because their resume is not working for them. And so they look to an outside source. They look for advice. They look for an opinion. And who better to get an opinion from than somebody who's been an athletic director, now an athletic administrator and a principal. So I've been able to help coaches all over the nation from, really only in the football world, only one Division I guy. Most of the time you're not going to need a resume for a Division I job, but did have a Big Ten assistant last year hire me all the way down to the high school level. About 70% of the business is high school. The other 30% is college. And what I've done, Keith, because, some coaches, it's kind of gotten to a supply and demand point for me because I've been so busy with these over the years. And last off season, it was about 125 resumes from, November to February. So it takes a lot of time. So the price has to be a little higher for me. It's something I do on the nights and the weekends. So what I did was I created at a much lower price point, under $100 now, I created a video course on CoachTube. It's 6 hours of on-demand video that walks coaches through the exact process that I have used over the years to help coaches get their foot in the door, get their dream job. And so now, instead of, having to spend a couple $100 to have somebody dial in and create that resume, you can sit and watch it on your own. You can watch the step-by-step process. I also give you my book, An Insider's Guide to Securing Your Next Coaching Job. Talks a lot about the interview process in there. We give you a couple cover letter templates and then the actual resume template that I use. And so, again, I think it's a great opportunity for coaches who, they might not want to spend $225 on that resume, but they're able to spend, less than $100, sit at their own house, go through that at their leisure to dial in a tremendous resume that'll help them get their foot in the door for that next job.
And it's a resource I highly recommend. We've had Coach Fore on before talking exactly about some of the do's and don'ts of the resume writing and cover letter writing, and that is in one of our podcasts. I will link that in our show notes, as well as a link to Coach Fore's course on CoachTube. You can follow him on Twitter at Coach Fore and find his website at 8laces.org. Spell those words out, 8laces.org. Again, just a tremendous resource. Coach, great tips today. Really appreciate you taking time here on the podcast. And we're excited that we could put this info out for coaches as they game plan for their next job.
Yeah, no, Keith, thanks for having me. I think, we're in a new world with these interviews, so I'm hopeful that some coaches, picked up a few tips here today with you. I love what you're doing with this podcast, and it's been exciting to see it really grow over the years. So thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you again for listening to the Coaching Coordinator Podcast. Please, if you are enjoying the podcast, head over to iTunes or Spotify and click 5-star for rate. If you have a minute, write a review. It really helps the podcast. Check out our new home for the Coaching Coordinator Podcast. That's at coachandcoordinator.com. And follow me on Twitter at Coach K. Grabowski.